Hello and welcome! Today we're in the upcoming Tier 10 Italian cruiser, the Venezia. She is still a work in progress and thus subject to change. This is my first look on the ship. In fact, this is the second match I played in the ship. So I am not exactly experienced at it and I am not quite sure how I feel about the ship. I have played a bunch of matches, so I have an idea, but I haven't really settled on it. And I will make a preview video later on. Now, so far, the ship feels fun. Lots and lots of fun. I like her a lot. Now, this might indicate that she's overpowered, perhaps, but I am not quite certain. Around the 12 to 13 minute mark, I will show her in port, so if you're interested in looking at her stats and armor, you can see that at that point. So, you can see a few things on the ship so far. She does not have HE, she has SAP, because apparently the Italians are quite sappy. SAP is basically kind of like HE, but it doesn't set fires. It has good auto bounce angles, so it still can be bounced if the angle is too bad. But on the other hand, it can hit ships quite hard, harder than HE. And the DPM with SAP on this ship is actually quite amazing. Now, on the other hand, the AP on this ship isn't quite amazing. Some other CCs have compared it basically to what ZAO AP is, so it's not great, but it's pretty good. But what makes the ship pretty good is the smokescreen that I just used, which is a smokescreen that you can use while going full speed. Now, at the time I hadn't quite realized it yet. I used it more like a regular smokescreen, but you can use it while going full speed. It works kinda like a Perth smoke, except it's much shorter, and like I said, you can keep going at full speed, the whole 38.5 knots that the ship gets up to, which is really fast, by the way. Now, SAP works mostly well on ships that aren't bow on to you. As long as they are not angled too much, SAP is excellent, because on this ship SAP can basically penetrate 54mm of armor, as long as the angle isn't too great. So basically it still has the auto bounce problem like regular AP does, but the auto bounce angles on this ship are really good. Basically, fighting a ship with SAP, at least the Venezia, is kinda like fighting a Minotaur. That's kind of how you should angle against the ship if you want the SAP not to do much damage. And honestly, while SAP can hit really hard, I mean, I hit that Minotaur for a good 10k, if a ship is bow on, there often isn't all that much you can do. Sometimes those shells work out when you fire at a ship that's bow on to you, sometimes they don't. I fought a Kremlin and I had a very hard time doing much to her. Now, of course, you can then obviously pick better targets, right? And I suppose that is one thing you should do. And I certainly didn't feel like the firepower in the ship just wasn't good enough. The SAP itself felt really good anyway, because you could do these nice 10k salvos. But that's mostly down to the fact that the ship actually has 15 guns. Now, the reload on them is quite long though, it's 20 seconds. With the upgrade it gets better, but still, it's 20-second base reload on a 203 cruiser gun, so it's not amazing, but the DPM is still there. It's less than what the Des Moines has with HE, but it's very close to it. So the SAP is fairly strong, I find. I mean, look, I did almost 8k damage to this booster. And this is the kind of damage you can mostly get with the ship. She's fun to play. She also has torpedoes, but you only get 3 torpedoes per side. They do go long range, but they're basically the standard Italian torpedo, meaning that they only deal 14,000 damage, and they are slow. 56 knots, so not amazing at all. So these torpedoes are generally not that useful. It's great when a ship is close range, but it's not something I recommend investing in. Also, the range on the ship doesn't feel great, because the ship honestly feels kinda like a super cruiser. when playing, because the armor scheme is actually fairly good when fighting battleships and whatnot. But on the other hand, the range is kind of lacking for a super cruiser. Now I understand she's actually a heavy cruiser, of course, but she kind of feels like a super cruiser because the shell characteristics are really good. I mean, you can see that the shells are fast. I don't need to wait long for the shells to get there. And so the 17-kilometer range feels lacking. Of course, you can buff it with the upgrade, and obviously I have a scout plane for that, but the base doesn't feel great. Well, or rather, I guess I should say, you could do better than what the base is. Like on some ships, for example, the Des Moines, you sometimes think that is more range actually worth it? Because you can't exactly take advantage of it too well because the shell arcs just aren't good enough, but on this ship, I would say that that's definitely a viable alternative. So, I'm gonna go close and try to engage this Zao. So far we seem to be winning. I mean, the enemy team has lost 7 ships, we've lost 4, so we're at a fairly significant advantage. And I'm gonna start heading closer to the ship, to the enemy ships, because I still have my smoke screen. Now, one thing that you might see that's missing on the ship is there is no defensive fire. There is no hydro either, so while your SAP shells can deal massive amounts of damage to destroyers, which you might have seen on Reddit or other places like that, well, you don't really have a way to chase down destroyers though, because if you start chasing a destroyer without having hydro, you're probably gonna be not too happy when you meet torpedoes. Now the ship is really maneuverable. The rudder shift isn't great, but the turning circle is really good, at least what it says in port anyway. I can't know if that's actually the true value of the turning circle, but the one you see in port is actually really good. And so the ship is fairly maneuverable, and as a result, I would say that you could chase down destroyers, but I think it's not gonna be a great experience. If you run into one, then I think that's the time you want to fight DDs. Okay, at this moment, I just want to get out of here, because I know there's a destroyer in front of me, and there are 2 battleships over there, so I think getting out of here is the best option for me. While obviously dealing some damage to this Yoshino. I'm gonna pull back for a bit, maybe have the Kofas tank for a little bit, and then turn around and go in again, after I have healed a little bit, I guess. While the armor on this ship might be great, it's still a cruiser, and so it's not exactly suited for just straight-on tanking of everything. Oh, the Smolensk is actually giving me a smokescreen. Oh man, that's really useful. Because I am far enough that I might be able to use this smokescreen to shell the enemies. That's really nice of the Smolensk. Oh. Oh wow. Actually sank the Shimakaze with my torpedoes. That's really lucky. Especially because it needed 2 torpedoes to actually sink the Shimakaze. So yeah, that's incredibly lucky. You really shouldn't expect something like that, but hey, as you can see, the torpedoes can be quite useful at times. And this means that I don't really need to worry too much about it. I'm just gonna sit here for a while and just shell the enemy ships, because I don't have to be worried about suddenly being torpedoed by something. Let's compliment the Smolensk for giving me that useful smokescreen, and I guess actually, maybe I don't really need the smokescreen after all anymore. There's only 2 ships left, so might as well go all in at this point to deal more damage. Oh, and that Republique has a lot of HP. My SAP is fairly effective against French battleships due to the penetration on these SAP shells, so it should be pretty good. Now, not as good as you would be in a heavy cruiser with HE, of course, because a heavy cruiser with HE can deal damage to the bow of a Republique, for example, whereas I will still shatter quite many of my shells there, or bounce them. But I do have a lot of firepower. 25 seconds on my smoke, maybe I can help the Smolensk like he helped me by giving him my smokescreen instead. That would be quite useful, but the Smolensk would have to survive until that point. I'm trying to hit the bow to see what it does to the Republic, because, again, seeing 4 ricochets, but again, this is the second match I played in the ship, so I don't really know much about her. So I want to try all kinds of things with her. But I mean, so far it has worked out quite well, hasn't it? Oh, 12k damage, that was pretty good. Okay, I gave the smokescreen to the Smolensk, and now I'm just gonna pass by her and then just head to fight this Republic. I'm gonna be spotted anyway, even if I'm in the smoke, so I might as well leave it and maneuver around. Luckily, the Republic seems to be not firing too well, so I haven't been sunk yet. Torpedoes out, but it seems that she is probably going to be able to avoid them. The good thing is that the armor on the ship is really good for close-range fights with a battleship. And I think if you were in basically any other cruiser, you would have been sunk by this Republic, because she did fire quite well, but this ship just has a 40mm plate along the sides and front of the ship, so it's difficult for a battleship to sink her while she's going straight at her. And I mean, I did 162k damage, 2600 base XP. For my second game in the ship, I would say that I did pretty well. I really enjoy this ship, and I definitely am looking forward to more matches in it. 2.4 million potential damage. It's like I really am a battleship, right? Here you can check out the ricochets and non-pens that I got on the ship, and yeah, it seems that you don't get too many of them when firing SAP. It's pretty good. And here I go through the ship so that you can see how much damage each of the shell types did. I enjoy this ship quite a bit. I've actually played a good 10 matches in her already. So, let's take a look at the Venezia in port. She's a really good looking cruiser in my opinion. Especially the bow, it looks really nice. And combined with this azure lane camo. Anyway, let's take a look at the stats of the ship. First, let's take a look at the commander skills. So I went with Priority Target, Expert Marksman, Superintendent, then Concealment Expert, and after that I went with Adrenaline Rush. And then I was in a bit of a pickle, because I really didn't know what to go for in the ship, because she really doesn't suffer much from fires, so fire prevention isn't that amazing. I suppose Vigilance could be really useful, because the ship does not have access to Hydro. Yeah, but I went with Survivability Expert, then Jack of all trades, and High Alert for the last 2 points. I suppose another thing you could consider is something like Radio Location, which could be fairly good as well. And, like I said, Vigilance. And maybe something like AFT or some kind of AA stuff. It's something to consider for everybody. I am just not sure whether even this build is really worth it, but that's what I settled for. Then, in terms of the consumable, she has a standard damage control party for cruiser, 60-second cooldown. This is down to 48.73 seconds because I have the flag, which is minus 5%, I have Jack of all trades, which is minus 5%, and High Alert, which is minus 10%. Then in the second slot, you have the Exhaust Smoke Generator 2, well, generator. It lasts for 40 seconds and has a 10-second smokescreen dispersion time. And with all of the stuff, you have 3 consumables. It has a 3-minute cooldown, but what's amazing about the smokescreen, even though it's so short, is that you can go full speed while firing and being undetected, provided of course that you're far away enough from all the enemy ships that would spot you through the smokescreen, but it is quite amazing, and I find it really, really useful. In the next slot, you have your float plane. I go with spotting aircraft because the range on this ship is quite limited at 17.1 kilometers, I believe. And so the 20% range is very useful. Maybe fighter is good, but I haven't really had enough experience with CVs on the ship to know that for sure. And in the last slot, it's I think a standard cruiser heel. I could be wrong, but it looks like a standard cruiser heel to me. In terms of upgrades, it's pretty much standard fare. You go with main arms modification. I believe in this slot there should be the smokescreen special upgrade, but for some reason it's not available. Perhaps it's an error by Wargaming, perhaps it's not, but since it's absent, I go for damage control system modification 1, because it makes more sense than the other two. In the third slot, I go for aiming system modification. Something you could consider is the AA guns upgrade, but again, I don't have enough experience with CV, so I don't think it's really that worth it. In the fourth slot, I go for steering gears, because the rudder shift on this ship is pretty bad. 9.3 seconds at least when you consider how good her turning circle is, if that turning circle number is actually what it really is. In the fifth slot, I go for concealment upgrade. You know, I did consider for a little bit that maybe going steering gears could be amazing, because this turning circle, at least numerically, is better than what Des Moines has. And if you could get good rudder shift, you could be a very slippery ship, especially combined with the speed. Now, the reason I decided to go for the concealment is because you want a good concealment rating for when you're firing in a smokescreen, and because of that, I think concealment makes slightly more sense. In the last slot, I go for the reload upgrade. Now, I think you could make a very good case for the range upgrade, because the shell characteristics on this ship are very good, and I feel like she's lacking range, or rather that she could take advantage of more range fairly easily. But so far, that's what I decided upon. Now, let's take a look at the most important part, which is the armor layout. Now, it looks fairly standard-ish on a cruiser, right? It's 25mm bow, 25mm bow, 30mm deck in the middle, 30mm side armor plate, 25mm stern, and 25mm stern again. So actually not that amazing, and the standard 16mm superstructure. So you could look at this and go like, wow, that's not actually that great for a tier 10 cruiser. But you would be wrong, and here's why. Look at this armor plate right here, 40mm. And it goes straight to the bow of the ship. Look at this. This is amazing. Oh, actually, let's check out the Citadel first. This is where the Citadel is. Look, it sits above the waterline, quite high up. That's not great. Damn, the forest ships thing is annoying me. Go away. Okay. Look at this. Only 165mm. This is not great. However, there's also the 40mm side plate on here, and it actually even covers quite a bit at the of the stern as well. So sure, if you hit right here in the middle, you can go through with even Yamato shells with overmatch. Well, I say even, but if you, for example, were at the front and the ship comes bow on at you, and you are a Yamato, and you hit this part of the ship, which is trying to hit which is something you would like to go through if you want to hit the Citadel, you're gonna be very disappointed, because these will simply bounce, even Yamato shells. So I think the armor scheme on this ship is actually fairly good. And of course, when you're broadside to another ship with good AP, you're gonna just disappear immediately. You're just gone. Poof! But you can play around it, especially because you have some very good maneuverability. So let's take a look at the stats on the ship. So with Survivability Expert, she has 55,300 HP. It's not the greatest for a super cruiser, but this isn't a super cruiser, it's a heavy cruiser, so this is actually very good numbers. Also 28% torpedo belt, which is actually really good. In terms of artillery, she has 15 guns, 9 at the front and 6 at the back. They're all 203s, but she does not have HE, so you have SAP and you have AP. The SAP actually has a higher alpha damage, but SAP isn't going to Citadel anything, so you're gonna look at AP to deal the massive damage still, because SAP only has 54mm of penetration, and if I understood how it works correctly, if you hit thicker armor than that, you're just going to shatter the shells. So it's not actually that amazing. She also has a fairly long 20-second reload for a cruiser. It gets down to 17.6 seconds, but that's still really long. However, 15 guns means that she still puts out a very good 266k DPM on the SAP shells, which is slightly less than a Des Moines with HE, but I mean, this ship is this ship and Des Moines is Des Moines, right? So she can put out a lot of DPM. Of course, no fire, so perhaps she actually isn't that amazing in terms of a damage dealing ship, but in my experience she felt quite good, especially because the shells are really fast. 910 meters for AP and 950 for SAP means that you can hit ships quite well. Now the 17.1 kilometer range with the shell characteristics doesn't feel great, but I mean you can just extend it with the plane and the upgrade if you so choose. She also has secondaries, but they have 6.3 kilometer range, but I mean, I'm not gonna try playing her like Siegfried quite yet, maybe in the future. In terms of torpedoes, they're quite lackluster. You have one set of 3 torpedoes per side. They have a very short cooldown, 71 seconds only, but they only deal 14,000 damage. They do go far, 13.5 kilometers, but they are slow, 56 knots, and they do have a good detectability of 1.1 kilometers, but being as slow as they are, maybe with torpedo acceleration, but even then, the amount of torpedoes you have, I think, doesn't make torpedo acceleration worth it. This is the AA defense numbers, if these tell you anything, because even the old AA stuff didn't really tell me much. And these, yeah, they tell me even less. So I don't know what this means, and I haven't had enough experience playing against CVs with the ship to know if this is good or bad. So, maneuverability, 38.4 knots. Even though in-game it actually says 38.5 knots when you go full speed, this is with the flag. So this is a really fast cruiser. And this isn't with like a speed boost or anything, this is just what it can do flat out. 760 meter turning circle is actually 10 meters better than the Des Moines. But of course, we all know that, as Little White Mouse has found out, these numbers aren't always accurate, so who knows what the real turning circle is, but it did feel pretty good. Rudder shift at 9.3 seconds is kinda not great, but it's not terrible either, so it's okay. 12.4 kilometers concealment isn't amazing. For a cruiser, it's actually quite bad. It's like battleship levels, in fact. But I mean, the ship felt okay playing like this, especially combined with the smokescreen that you can use while going full speed. It's okay enough, good enough. And this is the number I think is very important: detectability after firing main guns in smoke. So if there are no ships within 10 kilometers and you see a ship, you can just fire and smoke and then keep going full speed and fire for those 40 seconds without being detected. It's actually quite amazing, and I really like using this cruiser. I find her to be quite fun, which might indicate that she's overpowered, but I don't really know whether that's the case right now. It feels a bit strong in quite a few instances, but on the other hand, I have heard some reports from other CCs that they don't think it's that great, or it hasn't really worked out for them, so we'll see how it turns out later on. But so far, I find her to be fun. She definitely doesn't feel lackluster. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I would like to thank the patrons on Patreon. Thank you very much for your continued support, Nashiro, and I hope I'll see you guys next time.